Okay, everybody, we're probably going to start very soon. All right, welcome back. For those of you who've just arrived, welcome. And for those of you who've been here for our other events this afternoon, welcome back. Before I begin, I'd again like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So this room looks like it's going to fill up again, which is great. So we are going to live stream this one down to Western Theatre. So yeah, there will be a second theatre watching this one via YouTube, and viewers at home as well will be watching this one via YouTube as well, which is very exciting. So I'm not going to say too much more. Just to say also, after this session, we will be hosting our opening reception downstairs in the Crawford Courtyard. We'll be having a welcome to country from Auntie Serena Williams, the Ngunnawal elder, which you're all welcome to join. So please do if you can. But for now, I'm going to hand over to a very capable chair, Mr. Mark Keonig from the Asia Foundation, to run this pretty exciting session on putting AI in aid. Thanks, Mark. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Cameron, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure to join you here today. The Asia Foundation is a proud partner to Australia, the ANU, and to countries across Asia and the Pacific, and we're always incredibly excited to be a part of this conference every year and to be one of the supporters. And we have a really exciting contingent of speakers and panelists from our partners as well as our organization who will be spread throughout, and we hope to get to know and engage with so many of you over the next few days. But it's my great pleasure to be here. I'm the Vice President for Programs at the Asia Foundation and based in San Francisco normally. And I just got off the plane, so apologies if I trip over myself at any point. But you know, this is a really fascinating conversation to kick the pre-conference, I guess, technically off. And it's one that is really exciting for the Asia Foundation to be a part of. We are based in San Francisco. We've been there for 70 years. And we have a bit of a front row seat to some of the interesting developments in Silicon Valley that have been so much in the news and in our lives increasingly. Last year, the Taft president and CEO, Laura Miller, gave a keynote address talking about AI and talking about how we have great potential, but also the potential for new technology to be overlaid over some long-standing challenges for development without necessarily solving, fixing, or allowing us as development professionals and academics to do better at our work to overcome some of the complexities that mean that problems like injustice, inequality, and fragility, weak governance persist in the world. Since then, 2024 has been for many a year of AI's coming out, and the capabilities of this technology have begun to be seen and be felt in people's lives in a way that they weren't necessarily being felt even just 18 months ago. But we're also starting to understand some of the challenges in the application of this technology and some of the negative externalities that come along with it, be it environmental with the use of energy and the use of water, be it the realities that crunching all that data means for labor conditions in certain countries that are hosting data centers, be it the mis and disinformation and the new tools that are available to both the good guys and the bad guys that make the internet sometimes a dangerous as well as an exciting place to be. And we've started to see these and face these at a time where we still don't know the full possibility of this technology. And as the community that thinks and works on development in a range of contexts, we know we can't ignore it, but it sometimes can be quite difficult to put our finger on exactly what our role in this rapidly changing ecosystem is going to be. And the development community isn't always uniformly innovative We have a lot of great innovators. We aren't necessarily uniformly able to respond to every change in the world, but I think this is a significant one, that if we do not get out ahead of it and start to think through the path dependencies of how we use these technologies today, as well as the reality that unequal access to the benefits of artificial intelligence may do to exacerbate some of the inequalities and great challenges we face in the world, as well as the understanding of what voices are represented in the creation of the AI models that are going to be shaping a lot of the systems that we work with going forward, as well as how it overlays on things like geostrategic competition, which we know is another big theme that's affecting our community in big ways over the last few years. So it's incredibly important for us to have this kind of context where we can grapple with these questions honestly and openly and learn from some of the innovators we do have in our field. And I'm incredibly excited to be able to introduce two such innovators and to sit through with you an exciting demonstration of some of the things that they are working on. Before I go to my formal introduction, I would like to plug that I'm especially excited to be up here with the Development Intelligence Lab because it is one of our favorite partners at the Asia Foundation. We do a really cool initiative called the Southeast Asia Pulse Check, or Pulse Check Southeast Asia, that really tries to use technology and use outreach to amplify local voices that are important as Australia sets some of its aid priorities and thinks through some of its strategies. And that's a cool initiative that I don't think is going to be the focus today, but worth a shout out since we're sitting up here together. So without further ado, let's hand over to our two panelists. We're going to hear from Miranda Forsyth today. And Miranda has many hats, it would seem, but currently, today, she's going to be wearing her hat as the co-founder of DragonFly Thinking, which is a really innovative system and idea that we're going to learn more about to try and think through how this nexus between AI and development can actually be used for positive outcomes in the field. She's also, of course, a professor at ANU's School of Regulation and Global Governance and one of the leading experts on justice issues in the Pacific. And today we're going to be hearing about her personal journey and professional journey with AI and what it means to be developing cutting-edge tools that can be applicable in the development sector. And then next, we're going to be turning to Bridi Rice, the CEO of the Development Intelligence Lab. She's a Fulbright scholar, a non-resident scholar, both of the National Security College at ANU and CSIS. And she's had a really interesting career in the private and public sector, including having been the director at the Australian Council for International Development. So I think it's a great honor to be up here with such great panelists. And I'm just as excited as all of you to hear about this new thinking they're doing. We will have Q&A at the end, but I'd ask we're going to have about 20 minutes for each speaker, and then we will open the floor for discussion. So Miranda, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that introduction, Mark. And I think that it really very nicely frames the presentation that we're going to give today, which is trying to think about what happens if you do lean in to AI and really try to explore it. So I'm going to talk to you about my own journey today with AI and with DragonFly Thinking and give you a bit of a demo of what we've been developing at DragonFly Thinking, remembering that this is a journey that we're on. And then I'm going to hand over to Bridi, who's going to talk about what they've been doing with DragonFly Thinking at the Development Intelligence Lab, and then launch some of our plans for next year. So back to my journey then. For those of you who know me, you probably think it's pretty funny that I'm standing up here talking to you about AI, because I am one of the most non-technologically people around that there are. However, what I lack in technical skills, I think I make up for in open-mindedness. And so when my colleague and friend, Professor Anthea Roberts, started talking to me about 18 months ago about how AI could make us all into better thinkers, then I listened. Well, probably that, and also the fact that when Anthea, who has one of the most brilliant minds I know, says that something is going to be the next big thing, then it usually is. So what got her interested in AI? Well, before that, she had developed a new framework called the Risk, Reward and Resilience Framework. You can think of it as being a little bit like a SWOT analysis or a cost-benefit analysis, except that rather than being a binary pros and cons sort of approach, it adds in this third element, making it a ternary approach, thinking about resilience, which takes into account how the system changes over time. So the RRR framework also really helpfully divides up these different categories of risk, reward and resilience into 3 further categories that provides much deeper insight and really can help us think through how we can go about shifting dynamics of systems in the way that we would like them to move. So if I might just give you an example of how this applies, thinking about one of my own areas of research, which is sorcery accusation-related violence in Papua New Guinea. So I'm interested in finding out, how does social media influence either the driving of this kind of violence, or else how can it be used as well to try to prevent it? So if we think about that question through the risk, reward and resilience framework, we can see, oh, actually I forgot to press the timer, sorry. I don't want to be taking too long. We can see that if we think about the risk, then the risk would be a combination of a threat, such as the threat of somebody uploading an image or a video of people engaging in sorcery accusation-related violence. But that threat will only have a real impact if people are exposed to it, and also if they're vulnerable to the kind of messaging or copycatting potential that it is sending out. Then if we think about reward, that exists at the intersection between an opportunity, such as an opportunity for human rights defenders to use social media to spread messages countering narratives about sorcery, but that again will depend on whether they have got the capability to use social media in that way, and whether or not they have got access to the kind of people who they most need to convince. And then if we talk about resilience, we can think about 3 different sorts of resilience. We can think about the absorptive capacity, such as communities developing educational programs to counter misinformation's most immediate impacts, or adaptive capacity, such as the ability of community leaders and law enforcement agencies to change their strategies in real time. And finally, there's transformative capacity, which really thinks about the potential within a system to substantially transform itself. So, for example, that would involve things such as widespread digital literacy programs. So while this framework, and I've put it on this, but you don't have to read that all in detail, just in case some of you might like to follow that up. But it's a very helpful framework, but it's actually very difficult to apply in practice. And so when Anthea reported that she and another colleague, Sam Bide, had been playing around with getting AI to help them to apply the framework, then I was really interested. So at that time, I hadn't really used AI for anything at all. Out of interest, who would you say uses AI in your day-to-day work today? Put up your hand. Okay, so we've got a fairly widespread, and in fact there is a really uneven spread both across occupations and across different regions of the globe. What we find is that some people don't use AI at all, some use it on a regular basis, and some just use it for absolutely everything. So, of course, as with anything new, your attitude to technology really depends on how often you use it. And the American research firm Gartner has described this as being the hype cycle curve. So when I started using AI, sure enough, I was right at the beginning of that curve, and I went up to the peak of inflated expectations, and then I went down into the trough of disappointment, and I like to think that I am now slowly trudging along the slope of enlightenment. Now, most people quite sensibly explore AI through taking out a subscription to ChatGPT or making friends with Claude or one of those other LLMs. But not me and Anthea. No, we jumped in with both feet and established a tech startup company. So we called that tech startup company DragonFly Thinking. And we called it that because, unlike you and I who have only 2 lenses to see with, dragonflies have got thousands of lenses, which gives them a 360-degree view of the world. And so we wanted to think about whether or not we could create software that would enable us to take in many different perspectives and to synthesize them in a meaningful way, just like dragonflies do. This is hopefully of interest to many of you in this room who are, like me, absolutely committed to seeing things through different perspectives and to listening to a whole range of different views and really paying respect to different kinds of knowledges. But this can also be really quite difficult to do, and so our DragonFly app makes that easier. So as you can see from this slide, for a couple of humanities-based female professors entering the heady tech bro world of AI, we haven't actually done too badly to date. And in order to develop our capacity in relation to aid and development more, we've partnered with the Development Intelligence Lab because Bridi and her team are also very open-minded, curious, what can I do to help kind of people. And that kind of attitude is really important because there are a lot of questions and uncertainties and even fears around the use of AI in our field of aid and development, like in many others. However, it's clear, as Mark said, that it's starting to be used. It's absolutely there. And so it's important to think about how we can get the benefits from it. In a recent World Bank report, they referred to AI as the new wingman of development. Overlooking the gendered nature of that phrase, I think it's pretty apt. Although Anthea and I like to think of it more as a dancing partner. So what does DragonFly Thinking do? And how is it different to ChatGPT? Well, what we've done is basically put a whole cognitive architecture or reasoning capabilities that can sit over the top of GPT or any other large language model. This makes it enormously more powerful in terms of its reasoning abilities. And it also guides users through our user interface to think in a structured way through particular issues. At the moment, we're grouping the different capabilities into the 3 categories that you can see on the slide. I've recently used them to think about the impact of introducing laws to criminalise polygamy, which is one of a new proposal in PNG, and to help me analyse my findings from a literature review of intergroup fighting in Papua New Guinea. But of course, it could be used to explore a whole range of issues, such as climate security in the Pacific, or how to better prepare for the next pandemic. People have used it to ask all sorts of questions, such as, should I get a new dog? Or what are the benefits of having a divorce? You know, it's up to everyone, and it's interesting to see how it takes you through those questions. So I could tell you how DragonFly works, but sometimes it's better to actually experience things for yourselves. So I'm going to give you a demo. Can we switch to my screen? Okay, so this is DragonFly. This is the user interface. And I thought that it would be interesting to ask it a question that we're here in the room to discuss, the use of AI in aid and development. And so I've already established the issue in this, in the interface. Can you tell me when I've got 5 minutes? And it has, and we've discussed a little bit how to frame the issue. So I'm not going to demonstrate that live because it can take a little bit of time setting it up. But you see, generally it allows you either to do an analysis of an issue or an analysis of an objective to be achieved. And it's actually really important working out what question you're really trying to analyse. It also then allows you to enter in the perspective that you might be interested in viewing this issue through. And of course, later on, you've got the opportunity to see it through different perspectives as well. And then what we do is we go about developing our drivers of risk, reward, and resilience. So can anybody tell me any concern that you might have about the use of AI for me to plug into DragonFly and see what how it formulates that particular driver? Any big risks that you can think about, things that keep you awake at night?
I guess the issue of privacy.
Privacy, thank you. So data privacy. Okay, so what we do is we make a suggestion here. On the left-hand side, you've got the chat function, which helps you to come up to formulate the driver of that you're interested in. And so it has come up with a little bit of an explanation about this particular concern, saying driver data privacy breaches pose significant threats when using AI in aid and development, especially when handling sensitive information about vulnerable populations. If unauthorised access occurs, it could lead to misuse of personal data, identify theft or targeting of vulnerable groups. For example, if health data about a refugee population is compromised, it could lead to stigmatisation or exploitation. So that looks like, that's a pretty reasonable explanation of the driver. And so we then ask it to transfer it into the system. So you can see that this process, it's very much like, you can use it very much like doing a brainstorming around a whiteboard where people propose things and you write it on sticky notes and put it up on the notice board. Only, as we know, the problem with that, at the end of the day, people leave and you're left with a notice board with a whole lot of sticky notes. So the good thing about DragonFly is that it enables you to flesh out the entire thought, and then it compiles it into a report that everybody can take away with them at the end of that brainstorming session. So if you see here, it's come up with a little bit of an explanation about the driver. It's explained what the importance is, and it's broken it down into its different components. Then it provides a few examples of how that risk could actually transpire. And then it provides some indicators. So those indicators will be things that are almost like early warning signals for you to think about whether or not that risk is being materialised. And so then we can save it into the system. We can then think about developing our rewards and then also our resilience drivers. Often it's difficult to brainstorm resilience. It's one of those things that when people say them, then you're like, oh yeah, that's kind of obvious, but actually trying to generate them yourselves can be quite difficult. And so we've got this nifty feature of AI autofill, which is where it generates a whole lot of potential drivers for you to consider and then to edit as you like and to either put into your system or to reject. So it's really helpful at getting over blank page syndrome. So you can see here it's come up with a few things that we could do. So it's suggesting maybe one form of resilience would be to have robust integration framework. So aid organisations can develop robust frameworks for incorporating AI systems to ensure smooth integration and minimal disruptions, and then sets out the ways that you could go about doing that, as well as some indicators as to how you'd know if you're doing it well. So once you have got your whole map done, then I'll just show you. This is what it would look like. I've done this as in a cooking show. This is one that I prepared earlier. And you can see that it's got all of those different drivers filled out. And then I honestly think this is when the fun part starts, because then you can start doing some analysis on it. And we've got a whole lot of different ways of doing analysis. I'm not going to have time to go through all of them, but for example, you can see the issue through these different perspectives. You can see that I've already identified some of the potential perspectives that might be relevant. And we can also compare and contrast the perspectives of the relevant actors to see where there might be tensions and where there might be synergies. We can also think about what are the connections between the different drivers. So again, I return to the idea about all of the different factors that you might put when you're doing a brainstorming on a whiteboard, but you don't really know how they're connected to each other. So what this system does is it analyzes to work out which drivers are connected to which. And so what happens if you change one driver, what kind of impact will that have in terms of the other drivers that are operational in your system? Will it increase it? Will it decrease it? And it explains to you, what are both the probable first order and probable second and third order effects. Of course, it's important to say this is all just probability based, right? So we're not predicting the future here. In terms of interventions, it can also help us to think through what could be some potential interventions that could be made in order to help to address concerns we might have about different drivers. So I think I will leave it there and hand over to Bridi, who's going to talk about how she's been using it in the Development Intelligence Lab this year. But if anybody is interested in asking me a question, if you're trying to work out, if you do need another dog, or if you've got some other question, then come and see me afterwards and I'll be more than happy to give you a demo. Can you put it back?
Alrighty, thank you so much, Miranda. I have actually had the privilege of seeing the divorce example, so if you're in the market for that as well, I can definitely back the system. So look, the Development Intelligence Lab, for those of you who don't know, we are a Canberra-based think tank, and like any think tank, we do the usual. We hold Chatham House dialogues, we have a podcast, we have a microblog, and a few other things along the way. But at least about half of the work that we do here as a Canberra-based think tank is actually working on live policy issues with development organisations. So that looks like putting my very analogue analysts alongside and into development policy programs and decision-making processes, and using their really good research know-how to help Australian leaders and international leaders make better decisions. So we broadly think of our work in this space as decision-making support. And over the last year or so at the lab, and in very close quarters with Miranda and Anthea at DragonFly, we've been having a little bit of a quiet experiment. And really the experiment has been, can we do this work better? Is there a way to help local leaders in the region at its most ambitious, but for now, even just leaders of Australian development organisations, Australian policymakers and politicians? Is there a way for my analogue analysts to team up with a machine like that and get a better result, empower us to see things more clearly and make better decisions? So today, I'm just going to show you one of the tiny experiments we've run. This is very much, treat this as sort of lifting the lid on what goes on inside, what's and all, when you're really trying to co-create with this tool. So the experiment is that day in, day out at the lab, we ask ourselves, what are the big, wicked issues keeping policymakers up at night? And in this experiment, we challenged ourselves. We said, what would happen if we teamed my analysts with Anthea and Miranda's machine for 2 hours, right? It was tough. And we said, okay, at the end of that, we'll give everybody about a day to decompress, and it's their job to come up with a minimal viable product, policy product, okay? So that was done by lab analysts. Now, the classic sort of products that we were thinking about was what happens if a senior program manager needs to brief their board on a particular program? Or what happens if suddenly a minister rings and some poor bureaucrat has to give advice on the turn of a dime, right? Could we actually, in this experiment, do something better and faster than we could have done it with analogue analysis alone? And so the issue that we chose was middle income traps in Southeast Asia. And I should say that quite deliberately for this experiment, I put a team of analysts on there who know nothing about middle income traps. And that was for 2 reasons. One, we wanted to test the quality of the machine itself without it being guided and prompted too much by expertise. The other thing is that Stephen Howes has the best development economists in the country. I don't. So that was how we ran the experiment. Now, first, we analysed the issue, right? We were looking for what are the risks here? What are the opportunities facing these countries, and how does this shift over time? Now, using the machine that Miranda just showed you, we prompted it for around about an hour, and we were able to then later lay out this pretty basic looking placemat. Now, there's thousands of words and nuance behind this, but what you see up here is an assessment of the sorts of risks faced by middle-income countries. So, of course, the types of threats facing these nations will be loss of access to development finance. They'll have a significant exposure to climate change impacts. They might be particularly vulnerable if they have a lack of economic diversification, for example. When you think about what we call opportunities, but in the RRR framework, when you're thinking about really the rewards, the big opportunities these countries face, you're thinking about opportunities like the promotion of tech innovation, right? You're thinking about how countries can build capabilities to really maximise these opportunities, things like innovation in governance and policy making. And the second I started seeing this, I was thinking about, the Indonesian government demand for great policy innovation, for support from Australia around a knowledge ecosystem, and the sorts of things that would maximise the Indonesian government's exposure to the opportunities they have to perhaps avoid a classic middle income trap. And of course, when you're thinking about things ahead in time, I say look ahead because resilience to me can also mean a million different things, then we start seeing that middle income countries will need to be absorbing various shocks and stresses by things like ensuring they've got political engagement, ensuring their institutions can adapt, etc., etc. Now, this was the result of about an hour or so's work, again, by people who are not expert in development economics. And part of that, quite seriously, was the use case that we were imagining at the time, where perhaps leaders of nations that don't have teams of researchers, they don't have entire bureaucracies full of extraordinary policy analysts, where they might have access to the sort of information and a way into a particularly wicked policy problem. We were really testing whether or not this machine might be able to give greater access to expert advice in this circumstance. And when we took this placemat and we showed it to a couple of people who actually know about middle income traps, both from the Asia Foundation at the time, also our own strategic advisor, Richard Moore, the reaction was, hey, I don't like AI, but in fact, this is actually not a bad snapshot of the sorts of issues that we would be producing if we were producing an analogue analysis. And what's more, every time we showed it to a development economist at the time, always they said, you know what, my bias would have been only focusing on the risks or only focusing on the opportunities, particularly if they were of more of a trade type bent. So immediately what we were starting to see was that this was a quicker way to get a multi-perspective look at an issue that at least we didn't know a lot about. I'm sure many people in this room would know a lot more about. Secondly, one of the things at the lab that we're quite passionate about is making sure that we are understanding issues based on the intelligence, that's what our title is from, based on the intelligence and the insights of people with lived experience of development. Now, this is not something that is fully built into the tool just yet, although we are working on it. But in our 2-hour lab, once we had, of course, mapped out the issue in broad brushstrokes, we then challenged ourselves to switch our perspective. And for those of you who were in the Pulse Check launch earlier, this will be familiar to you. But we very quickly went through the data that the lab aggregates from just under 400 experts throughout Southeast Asia, and we started to ask ourselves the same question. How were these same issue of middle income traps, in this case, seen from the perspective of Indonesia and Philippines? I won't labour on that, but you can see and imagine how we're using this in a multi-lens kind of way. We then took our analysis and asked the question that was really keeping policymakers up at night, and that is what key areas of political and governance change are required to help countries in Southeast Asia avoid the middle income trap, right? And what we saw there was we were then quickly able to prompt the machine to come up with a set and a menu of the sorts of interventions that maybe an aid organisation or a donor might be grappling with. Now again, the thing that you would see here is that you may have a bias towards how Australia or your organisation ought to be supporting countries to overcome a middle income trap. For example, you might have a predisposition towards Australia supporting market access, trade, the mobilisation of finance. And I bet a number of, for example, NGOs in the region might have a predisposition towards thinking more about things like support to civil society, governance, research and education. So again here, very quickly we saw that the so what on this issue, the action that we might want to take, this machine was able to generate a number of different options that we wouldn't have necessarily come up with alone because of our own biases, our own experience working, for example, on governance programs for me. Fourthly, we then said, well, what should policymakers consider when designing their next step? And this is where we brought the machine and we put it to sleep for a moment and we came back to our analogue ways. And what you see here is a classic type of structured and analytical model that we use at the lab all the time. And we imagined with about 10 minutes to go in our live lab, if we had to deliver this advice to our board or to a minister or a leader in the Office of Southeast Asia, then we would say, you know what, government, you basically have a choice. You have a choice between helping countries mitigate the greatest risks of middle income traps. You have a choice instead of actually working with these countries to maximise the exposure they have already latent there to overcome these traps. Or you know what, there is a chance here that if you're playing a long game, you could focus more systemically. And as you can see down that left-hand axis, dependent on which strategy your organisation would choose to program, or if you're a leader of a Treasury department in one of the partners where Australia works, you would face the same choices. Depending on which way you go, you would make very, very different investments at an aid programming level. Right, we were exhausted at that point and completely ran out of time for anything more than that. As I say, we did it in an intense 2-hour period and then we gave people a day or so before they were able to put together a deck like this. But just to finish on a short note, it has been a real learning journey for us with Anthea, with Miranda at the lab when it comes to working with AI, and we definitely see it as a wing woman. No, just nobody laughed. No. And certainly in no way, shape or form do we see it at this point as a replacement for really careful and cautious thinking. But a couple of lessons that we have sort of extracted as a team when we've reflected. The first one is that there are times when we do use AI for efficiency. So think Copilot, synthesizing things. We use Notion a lot, which is an amazing brainstorming and process-driven piece of software. ChatGPT, of course. There are plenty of time-saving ways out there, but at least for us, and I think when we're working with DragonFly, we are thinking much more about the potential of impact and quality when we're talking about this type of AI. So this is certainly, I wouldn't say, a massive time saver alone. This type of tool will undoubtedly save you time when it's used in the right hands, but I think its primary benefit is that it helps us to actually think better, make better decisions, and train our people to think better and make better decisions as well. So that's one point. I do think in terms of biases, I know that was our real pain point at the lab. I mean, we're an organisation that's been set up deliberately to bring the insights of people in the region and those like yourselves who've worked in development for so long to the forefront of Australian development decision making. We're like, oh my gosh, you read the literature and the biases on ChatGPT and everything else are extreme. And we do think that that is a significant risk, but it's a risk we want to work with. And I've got to say, as somebody that steps in and out of government halls day in, day out in my job, this thing is overcoming the disciplinary biases better than any well-chaired roundtable I have ever been at. So last year at the DevPol conference, we launched some analysis around some of the really dominant mental models that were really holding Australia back from great development decisions, things like people thinking short-term, thinking about Australian reputations rather than maybe thinking in a longer-term or transformational way. This is the only tool that I have been able to put up, and I've seen defence colleagues, security colleagues, intelligence colleagues, civil society colleagues, local leaders all see themselves in an issue and want to come together in a constructive format. So I would not underestimate the potential biases, language, positionality, knowledge aside, but this is the area that I think is most exciting, because if we can continue to develop this tool from where it is just now into a tool that's really harnessing different forms of knowledge, then I think there's something exciting there. Thirdly, just around ethics and purpose, we had to think quite deeply about how we wanted to use this. And again, as I say, it came back to us as a point of quality and differentiation. This is a tool that enables young, unknown analysts who have bright ideas, who don't speak English as their first language, to harness material day in and day out in the lab, but thinking very, very, very carefully about organisational ethics and the purpose of your organisation when you're harnessing such a powerful tool like this, I think is something that would be on many of our minds and interesting to chat through. And finally, my prediction is that organisations that are able to effectively harness AI are the organisations that are going to stay at the forefront. AI like this, which is built to handle complexity, it's built to do what our single brains cannot do alone. I think it is this kind of nature of AI that's going to help leaders make tough decisions in tough times, in challenging environments. But it's going to be a journey that will be a little bit up and down along the way. So at this point, I guess I get the cool job to let you know what we are launching. So for 2025, there's an open invitation to every single person in this room and online to join a lab-hosted AI in development discussion group. It will be co-facilitated by Miranda and I, and it will kick off in early 2025. So if you are thinking about AI, researching AI, if somebody's tasked you to sort out AI in your organisation and you don't know where to start, we are designing this discussion group to be genuinely open and starting at ground zero on the AI journey. So email us if you would like to be a part of that when we kick off, probably in February 2025. The other option for collaboration, of course, is purchasing a license to DragonFly Thinking. That's something that already many inside government are thinking of doing and beyond. But if you do have a wicked problem in your organisation that you're grappling with, if you're working with local counterparts that are trying to work out an approach to something, then we're releasing a number of limited spots for next year to actually come together with both of our organisations in a workshop format and work on this issue. Now, we've been running these workshops on anything and everything from China and geopolitics through to sorcery-accusated related violence, through to middle-income traps. The sky's the limit on what the issue is, but we've got a number of opportunities where you'll come together, we'll do analogue analysis together, and then we'll jump on the tool, and at the end of that workshop, you will walk away with a full assessment and a whole lot of free advice along the way. But finally, the big one is that we have space for just 1 to 2 longer term partnerships for next year. So if you are in an organisation that has wicked problems, or you're looking to build a slightly different looking research function, but you would like analogue analysts turbocharged by something like DragonFly, then we are looking to partner up with organisations to really continue to experiment with this now that we've had the last year to sort of build a level of capability into it. We're pretty confident that unleashed on some big wicked problems, it could have some interesting results for you. So at that point, I will hand back over to Mark, but thank you so much. And yeah, really looking forward to Q&A.
Great. Well, I guess we need to resettle our chairs. Well, thank you for a really fascinating presentation and an exciting story of application of this really engaging tool. It reminds me, so the Asia Foundation, we have a partnership with the Stanford Center for Human-Centered Artificial Intelligence, and what we often talk about through that engagement is how do we make sure that the center of AI development is human augmentation rather than some sense of replacement, which is many what the field of risk is. And I think this is a great application where it's an augmentation tool. It raises some fascinating questions about if it works, what is the future profile of an analyst? How do you train people for this future? There's a lot of fascinating questions, but it's really great to see 2 organizations trying to be at the forefront and finding some of those answers through action. So we do have a bit of time for questions. If there are any questions from the audience, I think we have some roving microphones available. 1, 2, 3 for now, and then I'll keep your hand up if I, okay, 1, 2, I think you were 3. Sorry, well, that's fine. I'll go 1, 2, 3, and then I'll start my next.
Thank you very much. My name is Carmen from Ab Global. Fascinating, I think. I think it's really good, and I also hope, what I really like, it's also about the pulse check, because I see that it's actually involved in the views of locals. My question is that I think we all know there is always bias in who actually influence and determine what positions aid is. And so my question is how often the pulse check will actually take place, and how you choose your local informant to be able to continue provide that contextual into the system. Thank you.
Let's take the first 3 questions, then we'll get to the panel. So I think number 2 is over here, and then you can prep number 3 there.
Thanks so much. My question is that most of the data that has gone into the AI models is based on Western knowledge, because most of that has been documented, and we obviously work in a cross-cultural context and being close to the Pacific, largely oral cultures. So how are we working to kind of overcome that bias of the ways of thinking that flow through the AI systems? Thank you.
Thank you. Third question.
Sticking with the theme of bias, Dave Fournier here from the Canadian High Commission. based in Fiji. It's curious, Bridi, you mentioned there's a bias within AI, and you mentioned the Western bias. I'd like you to maybe drill down on that. What are the biases that you have seen? And is there a possibility, my limited understanding of AI is that it's continually learning. So in our using it, are we able to influence that bias? Is there a way for us to, in effect, help it learn in a better way?
Thank you. So let's go to the panelists, and then I have 2 questions for the next round. If there's a third, I'll add it.
Is that back to me now, Mark? I missed my cue. Yeah, cool. All right, so Karen, so nice to get a question about the pulse check. So the pulse check basically looks to aggregate expert insights from anything up to 50 people in every country across Southeast Asia at the moment, and mobilise those expert insights onto live policy issues facing the Australian government. So it's really looking to shorten the transaction time and the engagement and really inject that knowledge straight into the hands of policymakers. That is a project that has been happening over the last 18 months as a key input into DFAT's development of the development partnership plans. The question is whether or not there will be further funding to do more. I would love to keep that as a constant project. I think it's just so critical in the repository of information, and the power of having those voices to inform something like this is exceptional. But yeah, that is something that the lab runs in different regions at different times. So at the moment it's Southeast Asia. I'd imagine watch this space thereafter. But we do know that will be very, very powerful for trying to overcome some of the biases. Dave, maybe on the bias question themselves, the biases that I worry the most about is first up formal knowledge, which is something that you mentioned as well. It's all very well to have Harvard-based academic papers underpinning an LLM. That's great. What about all the informal and the misinformation knowledge as well? On the flip side, that's a worry. But the concerns that I have are sometimes language-oriented as well. So in our region, not only is there obviously a data deficit and a written deficit in the Pacific Islands, but it's not like we're seeing massive, Khmer-based LLMs being produced around the world as well. So there's a real language lag. So the glass half empty part of me is particularly concerned about those biases. The glass half full version is exactly what you said though, which is the chance that these machines can overcome those biases quicker. The translation capability of AI is only improving more and more and more. And I think there's going to be something fascinating to your question about the quality of AI development in oral, so like podcast software, for example, the quality and the ability to actually be capturing more local voice and knowledge and oral culture in a way that could be used by LLMs, I think is pretty high potential. So it is not there now, which is why we're doing this sort of AI and analog stuff where we're trying to switch perspectives in order to try and overcome that bias. Where I'm 100% confident is that it is overcoming academic disciplinary biases and certainly like policymaker agency biases quicker than anywhere else. And I think that that's exciting, but it's something that is definitely under development. The differentiation between DragonFly and say ChatGPT though, and I'm going to have trouble explaining this, but if you go to ChatGPT and you say, tell me what to do with the middle income trap in Southeast Asia, its result is naturally random, right? It's entirely scraping the internet and giving you a result on the day that you would see changes day by day. And you can have some funny moments where it's particularly woke and you see it's just come out on something or other, and you have another funny moment where you're like, oh, there's a climate change denier behind that. All right, it's quite a random result. What you get here is that Miranda and Anthea have built structured analytic frameworks over that scraping of the internet. So in the version that we haven't shown you yet here, because it is still in prototype, but we have actually started building out the perspectives of different types of communities, different types of thinkers, different types of leaders. So at this point, manually looking to build in and correct for the biases by injecting those perspectives over the top. So that when I ask the version of this that looks like development version, which I hope we're launching this time next year, when we ask that version, hey, how should we think about this? It should come back with a very strong idea of how a local church leader would think about the issue versus how, for example, a geostrategic competitor would think about an issue versus the private sector versus country, region, whatever else. So that biases thing is real. It's the stuff that keeps us up at night. But certainly my posture is like, that is not the reason to back out of this thing. It's the reason to dig in and overcome it.
And non-technologically oriented. I think that I've got this, great. So they did this really interesting experiment with one LLM, large language model, where they put a lot of data about the Golden Gate Bridge, just in all of its training material. And then every time they asked it a question, then it came up talking about the Golden Gate Bridge. And so there's definitely what goes into those LLMs, varies on, drives what comes out of them. However, we think it's really interesting to be able to use technology such as DragonFly to put over the top of different LLMs, and we're particularly interested as non-English speaking countries are developing their own LLMs. Putting something like DragonFly over the top of a Chinese speaking LLM should be really fascinating and really give us insights into a completely different set of perspectives than would otherwise be available. So there's also the potential that we are developing to have really proper document ingestion. So you can upload documents into DragonFly and have DragonFly analyse them and include that information into the analysis. And I've been doing that for my work on intergroup fighting in Papua New Guinea, for example, because there just isn't that material available on the internet. So I've had to synthesise it myself, put it in there, and then it's been able to really help me to make a lot of insights across the different literature that I've uploaded into it.
Thank you. And I think that raises one of the fascinating questions, which is for anyone trying to use AI to build solutions, you have choices about how you're going to do it, whether you're going to bolt on to one LLM, do this kind of flexible system where you can put on top of any, or build your own, run your own training. And for change makers across the countries where we work, this is a really big question that I think for all of us as development professionals, if we're using AI, we need to be able to talk about the cost benefit of these kinds of really critical choices. But I think we can probably do two more questions.
Can I just say, don't talk about cost and benefit, talk about risk, reward, resilience.
Yes, the 3 R's, excuse me, yes. I think we had a question here, and then 2, and then I just saw a 3rd here. Okay, then we'll do 1 here, and then we had 2 right next to each other, so it'll be easy for our microphone.
Thank you very much. Chris from the Australian CSIRO. Look, fascinating presentation. This kind of singular analogue brain is fizzing away quite merrily. Do you, I guess, crystal ball gazing a little bit, traditionally, I guess, providing analysis for decision makers to make actionable decisions, do you foresee a particular point of time where the decision maker says, look, that's great, your analysts have gone away and produced a package of work, but have you run it through DragonFly, for example? So I guess the idea is in the trust of one versus the other. Playing with that.
Hello, I'm Jana Hertz. I'm the team leader for the Connexi program, which is a DFAT-funded program supporting research partnerships between Australia and Indonesia. 2-part, very succinct questions. One is I was very interested in your comment about different types of knowledge, and one of the risks in AI is a lack of knowledge from particular groups. Our program certainly supports all types of knowledge, in particular Indigenous knowledge. So is there a way we can support these gaps? And then the second one is to what extent we can use AI for programming. The way we've been talking about it is in terms of analysis. But for example, say I'm developing an innovation program in Indonesia that responds to the middle income track. Am I using it for data analysis? So I say, can you run the Indonesian long-term development plan against the National Research and Innovation Agency's programs on innovation? Tell me what you get. Or can I say, can you develop a program on innovation in Indonesia that addresses the middle income trap? To what extent does that have that next level capability, or is it more of a synthesis of data type of use at this point?
Thank you. And your neighbor?
Thank you. Chris Cathravel from Monash University. This is on the risk side of the risk resilience and reward, but AI, I think, uses 10 times as much energy as a Google engine search. And so if we're all gravitating towards AI, whether it's in development or other sectors, how do we address that flip side of the risk of utilising all that energy, data centres, etc.? Given we're working in development, that seems like a pressing issue. The other question I had, and maybe it was indicative in the slide there anyway, is about national or strategic interests and prioritisation, whether it's a donor, whether it's a community organisation, local organisation. How do you put that framing into that model as well?
Thank you. Do you want to start this time, Miranda?
Okay. So in terms of, thinking about, is it going to be DragonFly or is it going to be the analysts? We think it has to be both. So we call that cyborging, and we're going to be increasingly learn how to cyborg, because we're going to, each of us have strengths and weaknesses, and so we need to cover for them. So I think that's the answer. It's not either or, it's both and. And in relation to the question about, can we use DragonFly to provide programming? Absolutely. So the first thing that I showed you, when we're asking it about an issue, we can either do analysis of an issue or we can ask it analysis of an objective. So if we've got an objective, we want to address middle income trap, or in my case, I say I want to address, gender-based violence and so forth, then it's able to absolutely help us to think through that. But really interestingly, to think through what might be some of the rewards of achieving the objective, but what might be some of the risks of achieving the objective, as well as some of the risks of not achieving that objective. Also, you saw that we had a section where you can ask it to suggest interventions, and so also those interventions can be, can form the basis of programming. And we're also developing the potential to do scenarios. So it will, from the basis of your RRR map, work out what are the areas of, high uncertainty, what are the key drivers, and then be able to generate potential scenarios so that then you can kind of road test different programming initiatives to see, well, what are they, likely to, how are they likely to play out in practice? And it also gives you some indicators so that you can know which of those sort of scenarios you might be tracking towards, so that then you can intervene as well.
Yeah, super. So will there be a day when somebody says, oh my God, go check with DragonFly? I would love that. And I promise that Chris is not on commission. We've only just met. But quite seriously though, true story, we have taken this for a run with a number of policymakers over the last year, and really senior experienced people who are used to commissioning advice from their departments and processing it. There are, a handful of ambassadors and senior officials who at this point are comfortable enough to say that the quality of this, certainly in an unclassified environment on open source material, the quality of what this thing is producing now, this early in its development, is up there alongside some of the best analysis going around. And certainly I can imagine in a situation where I would usually have, say, commissioned, say, a graduate or a young development officer in one of my branches to undertake have a quick look into how it is that Australia could better support civic space, for example, in a particular country, then my experience as that commissioner or that policy maker would then be that that amazingly talented young officer would go off and they'd start thinking, for example, about media freedom. And then they'd come back and I'd be like, oh, actually what I meant was, civil society engagement in policy making. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah, got it. And they'll come back with a research answer. And then I'll go, oh my gosh. And me as the prompter was actually a really, really poor boss to this poor, amazing young researcher who was going off on a foray of their own, coming back with stuff that just wasn't relevant enough. One of the strongest use cases, I think, for this type of thing is certainly getting a broad handle on issues early in the piece. And then I think, as we're saying, combined with experts, and I've seen rooms of experts actually working and prompting the machine to produce what I would say is probably some of the higher caliber analysis I've ever seen. So I don't think it is absolutely crazy to think that, and it may not be DragonFly, it could be whatever other tools are sitting latently around. I don't think it's silly to think that structured analytic techniques and LLMs pose a really powerful and complementary sort of asset to organisations. Be crazy not to be looking at them at the moment. Very just briefly on the Indigenous knowledge part of your question, I think that it would be very interesting to have a further discussion. It's not dissimilar to the issues that we're grappling with around oral knowledge in the Pacific and elsewhere, and obviously with the First Nations foreign policy at play in Australia, I think that there'd be something, amazingly exciting about thinking that through. And finally, Chris, on your AI and power and how does that, harmonise with climate change? We actually thought that was going to be an issue that was going to come up that we could plug and play in real time here. It wasn't. Honestly, it's not something that we have dealt really deeply with, but I would be saying anybody who's running a climate program at all should be looking into this, and if they want to have a look at that and want to think about it through an AI lens, then definitely in touch. And on programming, I think it does have a design. The sorts of areas that I would be deploying it into at the moment would be management team. So how are we thinking about these issues? What are we saying? Are we seeing our context change? I would absolutely deploy it into political economy analysis and country and context analysis. I would deploy it into understanding a sectoral analysis. I would deploy it off the back of really deep consultation to understand what you're actually hearing, to overcome the biases of your consultants who like to tell you what they think they heard rather than what maybe was actually heard. They're the kind of the areas that I think it is absolutely plug and play. One caveat though would be that certainly at the lab we think it should 100% not displace close engagement, consultation, listening. Like that has to be the foundation of any program. So if I was a program manager and I had anybody coming at me saying, hey, AI can design a program, just give me a day, I'd be like, go back and talk to some people first. So I'd just be a little bit wary about that.
Great. Well, and I think we're not the right panel maybe to deal fully with the energy question, but I think it's right to call it out and say, if we think from a development policy perspective, where are the semiconductor industries and the data centers that are going to be driving this fuel going to be, and what does that mean for actors trying to support those countries' development and their energy policy is one obvious place for us to start. But I think it's great to call it out, but maybe we need a couple energy experts up here with us for the next time. But I think with that, we are at time, and let's close by thanking our panelists for a fantastic discussion. And been my pleasure to chair, and I'll give last word to Miranda. Or no, that was
no. Just if anybody would like to ask some questions, we can ask the question about the use of energy as well. Then come and see me.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us.